Number 5. When I was growing up, one of my best friends told me about a very creepy situation involving him, his younger brother, and a man in the window. When my friend and his little brother were younger, they shared a bedroom. They're some years apart, but his younger brother was born with a multitude of different health issues, including multiple sclerosis, and he's confined to a wheelchair and cannot care for himself. So to keep an eye on him overnight when his parents couldn't, they shared a bedroom. One night, my friend randomly woke up for no particular reason and happened to glance over at his younger brother, but noticed something very startling. A strange silhouette of a man wearing a top hat looking in through the window behind his younger brother's crib. The first thing my friend did was jump up and turn the light on, then ran into his parents' room to tell them what he saw. When his parents came back into their room to investigate, his younger brother was having a seizure in his crib. A few of his family members say it was his younger brother's guardian angel standing in the window that night. My friend believes it was death. It's all still pretty unsettling to me. Number 4. I should start off by saying my brother is not only a military man, but he's your basic hetero, never let them see you cry cliche of a military man. He's not afraid of anything, well, except for the entire country of Japan. This is his story. My brother joined the Marines when he was 18 and was stationed in Japan. He really enjoyed his time there for a while, the girls specifically. He made friends with some of these Japanese guys his age who worked around the base. On nights where him and his soldier friends had this night off, the local Japanese guys would show them around, bring them to bars, and introduce them to girls. One night, after a little drinking and no luck with girls, the guy invited my brother home to play video games. My brother accepted the invite, and they played video games for a few hours. During this time, he tells my brother the main reason he wanted to get home early was because his little sister has been suffering from night terrors, causing her to wake up screaming, crying, and sometimes vomiting. He was worried about her and wanted to be home in case she had an episode. At this point in the story, I should explain how this guy's house was shaped. The house was built in the shape of a horseshoe, with a garden in the middle. His bedroom was at the very edge of one side of the U shape, and his sister's all the way at the other end. So they essentially are across from each other. If he looks out his window, he can see into hers, and vice versa. So anyways, they decide to call it a night, and the Japanese guy walks over to the window to look across the garden into his sister's window to check on her. He lifts the blind and peers out for a fraction of a second before jumping back screaming and looking at my brother like he just saw something horrible. My brother then goes to look and he stops him. He tells him that he saw a dark cloud with red eyes hovering over his sister's sleeping body. My brother, naturally, does not believe him and decides to look for himself. He creeps quietly over to the window and lifts the blind, but this time he finds himself eye to eye with what he describes as a dark black puff of smoke with a face. My brother and this other guy admit they got under the guy's covers and stayed there until it was light outside. Too afraid to lift the blankets and see that smoky figure had come a little closer and was in the room with them, just on the other side of the thin sheets. I don't know what to believe, or if maybe they drank more than what they say they did that night and imagined it all. But I know my brother believes what he saw. He sticks to his story, and when he tells it, he looks like someone who saw something truly sinister. Number 3. I've suffered from insomnia as far back as I can remember. I was in 2nd grade and it was really early in the morning, I think around 5 or so. I had a little TV on my nightstand and was watching television. I had the volume up super loud because my ceiling fan always made a ruckus throughout the night. I was super into the movie when all of a sudden, all of the sound around me started to slowly fade away. I remember I became confused and reached to turn my TV up thinking it had broken, but then I realized the sound of the fan had faded with it. The only way I can describe it is comparing it to someone turning the volume down on a car radio. I was suddenly overwhelmed by an intense feeling of euphoria. I have never experienced anything like it. I absolutely cannot describe how utterly at peace I felt. I was able to comprehend what was happening, and then it clicked in my head that I was dying. Keep in mind that I'm in 2nd grade, so this is a pretty intense conclusion, but I just knew. I rolled over onto my back ready to, and excited to, accept my fate. That was when I saw it. There was a large white figure in my doorway, just hovering and pulsating a white aura. I quickly panicked and began calling out for my brother. The figure glided to the end of my bed and just sat there, watching. I'm not really sure how much time passed, but the figure suddenly vanished. Sound came back and the euphoria disappeared. I jumped out of the bed and ran into my brother's room, where I practically flew into his bed. He woke up, and when he saw how panicked I was, he began to panic as well. I was hysterical and just kept telling him it was a ghost. We did what any other kids would do and hid under his covers. After a while, we got anxious, and I bravely made a peephole in the blanket to check the time on the clock, hoping that it would be daylight soon. 5:30. The clock read 5:30 in the morning. Then the phone rang, and it rang, and rang, and rang. Me and my brother started to panic even more. Then silence. Once again it began to ring, and ring, and ring. We jumped out of bed and took turns running from light switch to light switch until we had a light path to the living room. We got to the living room and watched cartoons until my mom woke up. She was livid, yelling at us for being up so early. I told her I saw a ghost, which only made her more upset. My brother, who was always tormenting my irrational fears, got mad at her and started telling her this wasn't a joke and it wasn't my imagination. I started telling her to check the phone because I saw the ghost around 5:30 and it must have been the ghost calling. She went to check the phone and went to the other room for a while. Suddenly, she wasn't upset anymore. When we asked if it was a said ghost, she said it was a telemarketer. She was so nice about it, she let me sleep in her room for the next few days. I thought maybe since it was my brother's birthday that day, she didn't want to argue. I got home from school on the 15th. I saw the ghost in the early hours on the 13th. My mom called me to the family room and told me to sit in her lap and that she needed to tell me something. I obliged. My great-grandma passed away in the hospital at 5:30 a.m. and the phone calls were my grandma calling to notify us. Me and great-grandma were extremely close. To this day, I get chills thinking about it. I know that there are a few ways to explain this occurrence, but I know for a fact that it was 100% a paranormal experience. My mom and brother still back me up on it to this day. Number 2. My mom had 3 kids. There's me, the youngest, and my older brother. But before either of us were born, there was Jonathan. He was a sweet little blonde boy, big blue eyes, known for accidentally repeating dad's swears in church. Wholesome kid, great in school, active outside. When he was almost 6, he was riding his bike and fell and hit his head on a rock. He got up and said he felt fine. My mom found him the next morning in his bed. When she tried to wake him up to get to kindergarten, one pupil dilated and the other did not. She got him airlifted to the nearest hospital. During this time, Jonathan's best friend Nick was sitting at the breakfast table eating cereal. Nick suddenly gets up from the table and goes to the door. When his mom asks him what's up, Nick says that Johnny was calling for him. You see, Nick and Johnny lived on separate blocks, but they weren't allowed to cross the street without a parent yet because they were still fairly young. But they lived close enough to call to one another to come out to talk at their respective street corners. So Nick goes out to the street corner while his mother receives a call from mine that Johnny was just declared dead in the hospital. Nick's mom can hardly handle this news and is now wondering where her son went. But Nick comes back a few minutes later and says that he heard Johnny calling to him, but he wasn't at the street corner when he looked, then sits down to continue eating his cereal. When his mom asks Nick what Johnny was saying, Nick says he had come to say goodbye. Number 1. I work the evening shift at a hospital that is believed to be at least 90% of the staff haunted. I'm part of the 90%. You see, there have been horror stories about every building, floor, and pretty much every part of the campus. I mostly wander around alone, and that makes it that much worse. At least when my mind is on it. I usually don't think about it. My personal experience was back in the ultrasound wing of the radiology clinic. By the time I got around to that area, the lights automatically dim, and there isn't anything I can do about it. It's always spooky back there at night, so I usually get done what I need to do and move on. The place is kind of shaped like a J, like a long hallway that curves around. On the inner side of the curve, there's a dressing room that opens up to a mammography suite, and then opens again to the top of the J. I was standing back there, tying a bag on my cart, when something moved in the corner of my eye. I looked up and through the dressing and mammo rooms to the other doorway opposite me. Vividly, I remember it like it was today. A male figure walks past the door right before my eyes. I literally watched it amble slowly across my field of vision. There are no male ultrasound techs here, and it was not my boss. It looked like it was wearing dark clothing and had long hair, but it was definitely male. I snapped out of it and ran over to see if some freak had wandered in, but no one was there. I grabbed my stuff and ran without finishing all the work, 'cause screw that. Another story, not my personal experience, but it comes from the second floor of the hospital. Second floor has nothing but offices and computer labs, all adjacent to one corridor, and that spans the entire length of the building. On one end is a set of elevators, and on the other a pair of double doors that open into a computer lab. This floor is infamous for being the domain of something the workers affectionately call Matilda. The first story I heard about her was from a coworker who knew someone that worked on that floor. He came in for whatever reason, doing office stuff, and was going home late one night. He walks out of the office and starts toward the elevators when something catches his eye. So he turns around the computer lab, and at the end of the hallway, there's what looks like a patient peeking into the lab. He walks toward her and asks who she is and what floor she came from. She turns around. She has no face. Office guy is frozen in place, scared shitless. He wants to run away, but he doesn't want to turn his attention from whatever or whoever is staring him down from the other end of the hall. What does he do instead? He closes his eyes as tight as he can. After several seconds, minutes, or however long it really was, he opens them and she's gone. He says he's never ran as fast in his life as he did that night, straight outside without ever looking back.